Well, hello everyone. Welcome to the Faith Focus Weekly Discipleship Podcast. My name is Kevin Rogness, and I'm the Discipleship Director here at Faith Covenant Church. As always, I just want to thank you for joining us, whether you're watching on YouTube or listening on any of the major podcasting platforms. Just make sure that you like and subscribe and share it with anybody if you think that any of these episodes will be helpful for anyone. Right now, we're in the midst of a series of podcast episodes that is mirroring the sermon series that we're doing called Healing Home. And we're delving into a wide variety of healing topics. So today, we're going to be expanding upon the sermon that we heard on this past Sunday, which was given by our very own Pastor Char. So she is joining me today. Thank you for being with us today. And she spoke about relational hearing. Last week I did an overview about just healing in general, and you spoke about relational hearing. Yeah. So can you explain a little bit of what is relational hearing and what was healing, and what was a little bit of a summary about your sermon?
Yeah. First thing to say is this is a really big topic.
Yes.
That could be couple months at least in itself. So so we didn't cover nearly all there is to cover about relational healing. So there were three words that we kind of walked through briefly. The first word was the importance of humility in relationships. The second is forgiveness. And the third is peacemaking, what that looks like, and some practical tips for that. And
like you said, there's always so much more content that when we're preparing our sermons, we're like, I could say these, 17 other things, but we didn't necessarily get a chance to go into that.
Right.
What were some things that you would like to share with us that you didn't necessarily get the chance to put into your sermon this week?
So much. Had we had a couple more hours, I would have talked about grace. Grace is a big piece that I didn't have time to do. And also the importance of our mouth and the words that we speak. And they make a difference. The phrase, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. That's not true.
Not true.
And most of us know that it's not true, and we've heard that's actually not true because we've experienced being on one side of that. I have a little sticky note on the side of our refrigerator that says the mouth has three gatekeepers. Is it true? Is it kind? And is it necessary? And
true, kind, and necessary.
Yeah. Because it's possible to say something, well, that's true. I'm going to say this because it's true. But is it necessary to say that?
Or is that a kind way of saying that?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Because the goal as we speak, especially, so we're talking about relational conflict, like relationships that need healing. So if there's somebody that there's a gap between where you have a need for healing, you really need to be asking all of those.
Yeah.
You don't have the right to say whatever you want to say, and you need to keep, the goal is to restore the relationship. So if what I'm going to say going to be helpful in restoring the relationship?
Right. So you could say something like, okay, so maybe there's a situation where you and I had a conflict, and let's pretend that you called me ugly. I could say, you called me ugly, you're a horrible person. It's true that she called me an ugly person, and so we need to restore that.
Yeah.
But the way of me saying that, of saying you're a terrible person, that's not kind, and that's not necessary.
Right.
So it was maybe necessary to address it. So I could say something instead like, you called me a horrible person, and this is how it made me feel.
Yeah.
That would be a better way of handling that.
Absolutely. Absolutely, yeah.
Thankfully, Char does not call people ugly, so.
Not typically. No.
Not to their faces, anyway. No, but, and so I think what you shared there about is it true, is it kind, is it necessary, that is also something that we can do as preventative work in relationships of making sure that you don't need healing in the first place in some cases.
Yeah. A powerful verse is encourage one another and build each other up. That's kind of my personal motto with social media. And things that I share on social media, are they going to be encouraging, and are they going to build people up?
Yeah.
Or are they going to be critical and tear things down?
Yeah.
So relationships.
Yeah. We always joke in the office that Char is the nicest person of all of us, and we were just saying that before our staff meeting a few minutes ago, and we're like, somebody disagree with Char? Like, what?
It's true. Ask my husband and my kids.
The people who know you best.
People who know best and see it all.
Yeah. But that's life,
Yeah.
Well, going back to the 3 words that you shared, humility, forgiveness, and what was the last one?
Peacemaking.
Peacemaking, that was it. Humility, during the sermon, you shared a definition of humility that I think comes from C.S. Lewis, but it's the idea that humility is thinking, what is it? How's it phrased?
It's not thinking less of yourself. It's thinking of yourself less.
Yes, and I think that's an amazing definition. I think it's C.S. Lewis.
I think it is too.
Yeah, he has said most of the smart things.
Right.
But that's a really interesting thing, because when you're thinking a lot about yourself, that can kind of go in 2 different ways, because you can kind of think too highly of yourself and get too much of an ego. You can also think too low of yourself. Yeah. What's the difference between those 2, and how do you kind of course correct in either of those situations?
Yeah, well, where's the attention being drawn? Are you drawing attention to yourself, either by drawing attention to yourself and talking about yourself, or the pity party? Oh, poor me, I'm this, I'm so sad for me, I'm the victim all the time. That is also a way of drawing attention to yourself. Or I'm worthless, nobody loves me. It's still about you at that point. So if you find that you are the subject of the conversation, that's one course corrective. Oh, how do I get myself out of the subject line into the object line, or put the subject on somebody else, or make somebody else the subject of the conversation.
And that's not to say that we should never share our experiences and our feelings, but we just need to have that awareness of, am I giving others space to enjoy this conversation as well? So one of the metaphors that you used during the sermon, or not, I don't know if it's a metaphor, but illustrations of relational gaps, you kind of talked about how there's a Bible verse that says, in as much as it relies on me, I'm going to do my part to restore this relationship. And so if there's a gap, you kind of said, like, if you're here and they're here because there's some sort of conflict in the relationship, you can only do so much to resolve that conflict. You can get yourself to here, but then someone else needs to do their work of getting to here. Anything else that you would add to that explanation?
If you missed it, Romans 12:18 is the verse. In as much as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Super important, because I think we beat ourselves up if there's a gap. We can't handle a gap. We want to fix it all. We want to make it better. We want to take care of it. We want to do all the apologizing. We want to bend over backwards and apologize. We want to shower the person with affection, gifts, or whatever. So we work ourselves into a tizzy, and there's still a gap. And then we're exhausted and we're frustrated and we're depressed and whatever. But the reality is, anyone can only come halfway. You can't, we're not responsible for the other piece. So a big part of the growing is learning, well, I've done my part, and now I need to just relax and not keep trying and like hitting this brick wall that might still be there, because I can't do anything more. The other person needs to move. Or in cases, it happens where God works a miracle and moves one or both people almost unbeknownst to themselves, almost out of their own power, and does the healing too, or makes healing possible.
And that's a hard thing too, when you've done what you can in a relationship to solve the conflict, but the other person isn't. That's an area of surrender that's really
hard.
difficult.
Especially if it's, say, a family member or a close friend or someone you've got a lot of history with, or you're real emotionally tied to. That it's more painful in those cases than someone who's an acquaintance, say. It's easier to not stay up late at night or all night long worrying about a relationship that's not real close. So it depends.
And then in situations where you've done what you can, but there's still a gap, how do you keep yourself, I don't know if safe is the right word, but how do you keep yourself from being hurt more? That can be physical, that can be spiritual, emotional, mental, and I want to be clear too that this is not necessarily a lack of safety that is intentional on the other person's part. They may not have any abusive intentions or anything like that, but what do you do to kind of protect yourself when there is still a gap?
Well, if there's physical abuse, that's a hard boundary. That is the physical proximity there has to be something very structured set in place so that you're not physically hurt anymore. That needs to be taken care of before anything else. But some of the others are a little more subtle. Like you say these biting things to me, or there's these cutting comments, or these things come out sideways, and the words sound like they're kind, but there's a bite to them. And, some things are just more subtle. And one phrase that I think of often is hurting people hurt people, which for me helps soften my heart or keep my heart soft towards somebody. If there's somebody who's just being unkind or unreasonable, they're doing that because they're speaking from a place of hurt.
Yeah.
So that softens me and tenders me toward that person. I think praying for somebody that you're in conflict with is huge, which is the last thing that you want to do is pray for the good of the person. Pray that God would shower blessings on that person, not pray that they would realize their wrongdoing or realize, God's the judge, we're not.
Yeah.
But to pray blessing and pray peace over them, and that too will change the way we think and the conversations we have in our heads.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When I think too, sometimes people say things, even if they mean it, they're not saying it because of the situation between the two of you. Right. They're saying it because of a completely different thing that they experienced who knows when, and that's informing what they're saying now, and that doesn't justify what they're saying. But if you understand that, it may help you to realize, okay, it's not just me that they're reacting to. Yeah. And that's a hard thing to experience. So we talked about a little bit about this too, but kind of a similar question on the same lines is, how do you, because part of what this is getting at is boundaries. There are times where it is necessary to establish certain boundaries in relationships. How do you determine when that's necessary, what that boundary should be, how long it should be in place? What are healthy boundaries?
Yeah.
And it's going to vary from circumstance to circumstance.
Right, because the answer is it depends.
Yeah. We were just talking about that a moment ago. It depends. It depends.
If there's physical abuse, well, that's a hard, fast, that is not okay.
Yeah.
And you have the right to say to somebody that is not okay. Or if someone is emotionally abusing you, you can say that is not okay. And ask them clearly to stop doing a certain behavior. Sometimes this comes up with addicts. If there's someone who's battling an addiction, you need to set a healthy boundary for their sake. For their sake. And for the sake of the relationship. I will not engage with you in conversation when you've been drinking.
Yeah.
Period.
Yeah.
Or doing whatever drug of choice as an example. So some things like that, depending on what the behavior is, or it's not okay for you to talk to me that way. So I'm not interested in continuing the conversation. So let's continue it when we're both in a better frame of mind and we can speak kindly to each other.
Yeah.
Or even I need a month. Like a timeout. We talk about timeout, and when I talk about with couples about conflict resolution, if you're in a conflict and you're just both heated up, one or both is heated up, call a timeout.
Yeah.
Don't say you need a timeout.
Yeah.
Say I need a timeout.
Yeah.
Don't point your finger at the other, but call a timeout. But then the important thing in a timeout is setting a time to come back and finish the conversation. Whether it's let's talk about this after dinner, or let's talk about this tomorrow, or depending on the nature of the conversation, the relationship, let's talk about it in a month.
Yeah.
Now, don't do that with somebody you're living with.
Yeah.
But if it's a friend or somebody who's out of town or whatnot, and you need a healthy break, maybe to do some counseling or some reading or some prayer or some reflecting on your own, then when you feel like you're able to resume the conversation, then set a time to do it.
Yeah. When just as you were saying that, I remembered someone who he was telling me that in their marriage, he and his wife have a rule of, if we're ever having a conflict or a discussion and there are just other things happening with the kids or whatever, either one of us can say, time out, pause this conversation, deal with this other thing first. We'll resume that conversation later, either when the other situation is no longer a thing or when we've cooled down.
Yeah. There's a good acronym actually that helps with that. The word is HALT. And it's hungry, angry, lonely, or tired.
Yep.
If one of those is going on for either party, don't start the conversation.
Yeah.
Don't jump on your friend when they are just coming back from a stressful day in the office and they didn't sleep last night.
Yeah.
And say, we need to have this conversation now. You know?
Not the right time. Give me a minute.
Right time, yeah.
We'll revisit this, yes, but
take a nap, get some food.
Yep. It's incredible how those physical needs do impact our relationships.
They do.
Yeah. It's crazy. Hangry is a thing.
Yeah.
Hangry is definitely a thing. So part of the struggle that a lot of people have with boundaries is this idea that, like, how do boundaries and forgiveness coexist? Because if we're supposed to forgive everyone, does that mean we don't have boundaries with them if we've forgiven them?
Forgiving somebody changes you. It changes the way you think and the way you feel about something. It doesn't need to change the physical proximity.
Yeah.
So there might be a boundary for years or forever that's necessary if behavior isn't changed on the other side. And there's a lot of ifs there, but you can forgive.
Yeah.
And you're choosing to release that person and release any ill feeling and any the rabbit trails you go on in your head and the angst and the anger that wants to rise up. You can release that and get rid of that by praying for them and thinking good thoughts about them and not letting. But you don't need to keep a boundary.
Yeah.
Or remove a boundary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and there's also, like, I've just learned a lot more in the last few years about the difference between forgiveness and reconciliation. They're not the same thing. Right. That forgiveness is the part that you can do. That's your part maybe in closing that relational gap. But the reconciliation only happens when both people have done what they can to close that gap. And so forgiveness may happen, reconciliation may not, depending on the situation.
Yeah, that's true.
And then trust, too, is a different thing. Like, if you've forgiven them, you may not trust them.
Right.
So that's especially prominent with, like, what you were saying with addiction. Like, you may forgive a person that says something, but you may not trust them anymore. So, along the topic of forgiveness, you may also be in a situation where, in the relationship that you're in, whether it's a friend or family member, spouse, whatever, where the wrong that they're doing is ongoing. So how do you forgive something that's still repetitively happening?
Yeah. Well, that's the hurting people hurt people. If someone's caught up in a cycle of hurting you, they need to get help with that. Yeah. There's something there that's not healed in them, and they're not able to stop that until they get some help. Yeah. So you can forgive them and see not that it's okay or that, to a degree they're a victim of something. Right. Or they're a slave to something within them that they may not be aware of. But yeah.
Yeah. And then along similar lines, what if the other person doesn't perceive a relational gap? Like, maybe you've been hurt by something, but they don't even realize that what they said was hurtful. Yeah. How do you handle those kinds of situations where they don't acknowledge, either they don't know or they're in denial that there's this conflict?
Yeah. And that's where great courage on the part of the offended or the wounded becomes necessary, because somebody might have said something that triggered something in you that they weren't aware of, or that was unkind that they maybe didn't intend, or maybe they did, or whatever. But if you don't say anything, you can't expect them. You can't hold them hostage for doing something they don't know that they did. Yeah. So that's when we need to say, "Hey, Kevin, do you have a moment? Is this an okay time?" So we had a conversation last week. I don't know if you remember that, and you said this. You probably are aware of that, giving the benefit of the doubt, but that hurt my feelings when you said that. Okay. And then I let you know, and then however you respond determines how the conversation goes. But if you don't know, you don't know. Yeah. Or you might know but not want to talk about it. Yeah. But it's still, if it's keeping me up at night, I need to say something. Yeah. Or it's gonna turn into that root of bitterness inside me if I don't kind of clear the air there.
Yeah. Well, and there was something that that has stuck with me from another conversation that I had for a previous podcast episode last summer, where I think we've all heard of the fight or flight response, that when we feel threatened, there's fight or flight. There's also freeze sometimes, where you just like don't know what you do, and so you don't do anything. Then there's also fawn, where you kind of fawn over the other person and you just try to appease them. That's sometimes a way of, I guess, perpetuating the lack of understanding that there is a relational gap here. And that's not to criticize anybody who realizes that they're doing that in a relationship, but it's just kind of an encouragement to help you understand and call out, oh, that's how I'm responding. That's a fawning response. Because I know I've done that. I'm like, when there's been somebody frustrating me, I sometimes don't want to rock the boat, and so I just do what I can to appease them and not even let them know that something's actually really hurting me. So the book Codependent No More is a really, really good book, not just for people who grew up in an alcoholic family, which is kind of how it was written, the codependency piece. But that's a good book that speaks exactly to that. You know, you're unhealthy. I don't want to upset you, so I'm just going to do whatever I need to do to keep things calm so you don't get upset. And that's that fawning. I haven't heard it with that word actually before. Yeah, I hadn't either, and so I was like, wow, that makes a lot of sense for me.
It does. And that's that codependent piece, I think.
Yeah.
To some degree anyway.
Yeah.
Interesting, yeah.
Well, yeah, like you said early on in the conversation, there's so much to relational healing. We could talk for hours and hours and hours. Is there anything else that you would just want to add for the sake of today's conversation about relational healing? And again, we're going to be delving into more topics of healing as we go on in this series. But anything else about relational healing today?
Well, the number one relationship is with us and God. So in order, we're supposed to love God and love others. So having a relationship with the Lord that is front and center in our lives will trickle down to every other relationship that you have. You know, we're not human beings having a spiritual experience. We're spiritual beings having a human experience. So
I've never heard it phrased that way.
Connecting,
I like that.
Connecting with God. I didn't make it up. Connecting with God and having that relationship daily and sound and honest will trickle down to every other relationship that you have. They say you become like the people you spend time with.
Yes.
So the more time you spend with God, the more you'll just become more like God, the more you read His Word and spend time talking to Him. Yeah. So that will trickle down.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. And if you have any questions, as always, my email address is in the episode description down below. I'll also include a link to the service that included Char's sermon, so that if you didn't get a chance to listen to it or watch it, you can do so there. So if you ever have any questions, please let us know. And as always, we just want to wish you a wonderful and blessed day.